We'll ask Abigail and Mikayla and Mitch if you want to come up to the stage right here for some questions answering. One thing I'll say kind of in this transition too, I really appreciate people that can tell a story with their data. And that's something that Ashley does a really good job with, so appreciate that. We'll open it up right now. We do have some microphones floating around. Who has the first question for the presenters? There's one up here in front, Caitlin.
This is a question for Dr. Jenkins. Did you, among your treatments, did you look at volume of milk consumed through a weigh-suckle-weigh technique? And furthermore, did you look at nutrient profiles of the milk among the treatments? And do you think those have an effect?
Yep, so we did not do any weigh-suckle-weigh for any of our sows on that trial. I mean, quite a few sows, and so doing those kind of analysis would have been difficult for us, and we didn't take any colostrum or milk samples from any of the sows on the trial.
Okay, Ashley. Time for dogma checking here. Okay, so how do you wind up with 4 cc's as the dose for oxytocin? Because that seems like a rather large dose to get that effect. And then the second question is, I do note the key thing you say about the timing is critical. So can you talk to us about issues that you may see if the timing isn't done at that exact time? Because I could see some instances where, you know, that protocol wasn't transferred correctly, that could seep back into the farrowing process. And what have you guys seen that, and any negative effects that you would see if that wasn't given at that exact time?
Yep, exactly questions that we had as well. So I will defer to Dr. Chantel Farmer. The very first couple of studies she did was a dose titration response on the oxytocin. I think she went way bigger and she went lower, and the conclusion for her was the 4 cc was the optimal dose to see the response in the IgG amount that was trying to be achieved. For the second question, we have done timing of this, and we even said, because it's easier just to administer it directly after she's done farrowing, right? I'm writing up her sow card, I see AB, I'm gonna put that on there, I'm gonna give her injection. The concern is that a high dose of oxytocin could continue prolonged uterine contractions after the fact. So we wanted to test that as well. We did see potentially a very slight increase in sows showing uterine contraction, but we saw no benefit whatsoever, because again, those elevator doors are completely open. So there's no benefit to getting more colostrum through during that time period. We didn't necessarily see a consequence, but we don't want to cause any distress. We don't want to cause any welfare issues, which we didn't see a high amount of that happening, but understand that there is a potential concern with that. And today we're looking to see what are the long-term impacts. So we have a trial going on. We've done 6 trials on this already. We are currently continuing to trial that and say, if she administers the high dose of oxytocin at P1 and then receives it again as a P2 and then receives it again as a P3, what is the long-term impacts of receiving that dose? Because we also have the same questions. What about longevity? What is the long-term impacts of that? And so we still have some questions we're looking to answer as well.
Again, greatly appreciate the effort of the panel and the quality of the data. Thank you for your efforts. Question for Mikayla. Maybe I misunderstood your protocol, but it looked like there was a timing difference for the time piglets were kept away from the sow, 45 minutes versus 90 minutes. So is one of the potential conclusions is that time away also had no impact?
Yeah, so we did have that difference. So when we pulled off pigs based on birth order, we pulled them off for 45 minutes. And all pigs within the litter were removed. So we pulled off those earlier born pigs, followed by the later born pigs for 45 minutes. For the second treatment, we just wanted to focus really on colostrum intake of those lighter birth weight pigs. So we pulled off only the heaviest date born for 90 minutes. So we did have a difference in the timing that those pigs were removed. So potentially time could have an impact. There's some studies kind of that Dr. DeDecker was mentioning, those studies that saw a difference pulled off pigs for a longer amount of time. So I think those studies pulled off for greater than 2 hours. So there could be an impact of time, but I think from Dr. DeDecker's work, really, even if you pull them off for longer, you don't really see differences.
Actually, the Dr. Jeff Villay's study was one of the studies from 2014 where he saw a positive impact on pre-wean survival, and he used a 2-hour separation into the toe, and that's what we used, was a 2-hour, just to mimic what he saw successfully.
Ashley, did you pull the smalls then too?
So we took,
because in your guys' study, you did the big ones off, and then you swapped it out with the smalls. Did you do that as well, or what was your process?
we did multiple processes. So the very first trial we did the double swap, I call it, yeah. We take the big and the small, we split suckle them off twice. So we wanted to call it like the Rolls Royce, like go big or go home, do everything. And that's where we saw the detriment in the P1s. And then the last final study we did is where I mimicked Jeff Villay's work. And we did the 2 hours, and we pulled off the first 5 born with the fullest belly pigs, is how we identified them. And they were all marked, so we knew the birth order of all of them as well.
Yeah, thank you all for very good presentations. I've read some work, there's not a lot of it, that suckling intensity can affect the subsequent lactation. So if you're, if they're suckling less pigs in their teat count, does that have any negatives for subsequent litters and the ability of them to raise pigs in the subsequent litter? And that's particularly, I think, the case in the posterior teats. If they're not suckled, then they produce less milk in a subsequent lactation. Any thoughts on that? I know it may not have been part of your work, but I'm sure you did a lit review, maybe.
Yeah, so that was one of our concerns going into the trial was if we're loading these sows up, are we going to negatively impact that subsequent litter? And so we were able to follow these sows through that next litter and saw no significant differences in that subsequent farrowing rate, but we actually saw a significant increase both in subsequent live born and subsequent total born as we increased that pig count relative to functional teat count. And so that was surprising to us because there hasn't been previous literature that would suggest that that's what we would see. And so I don't know that we think that it's a suckling intensity response potentially leading to maybe some hormone responses there in the sow. So that was a very interesting finding of this study for sure.
So thinking about all the different presentations, and one was on the big one on scouring and the issues, and then thinking about split suckling and climbing in and out of the crates at an early age within 24 hours. Did you see increase in scouring in those split suckling ones and versus the ones you didn't split suckle, and having more interaction, human interaction during those first 24 hours, climbing in the crates and anything? Does that increase scour problems due to putting more bacteria or E. coli into the system?
You want to start?
Yeah. So in our study, we didn't directly, measure or keep track of that, but I would just say from being at the farm every day, being the ones that do it, I don't think we really saw a difference in scours between those that were split suckled versus non-split suckled. But I think you bring up a good point of, are we maybe doing too much in that early post farrowing period? Are we trying to do too much with those litters, handling them too much, and could that have a negative impact?
And we did measure percent litters that scoured, and we had no statistical difference between the treatments. The other thing kind of goes back to is, and this is theoretical, when we saw that the P1 litters actually had higher pre-wean mortality, when we were doing the most intense split suckling program where we did the double split suckling and in and out, we did notice the comment was from the team that was doing is that those P1 sows are more jumpy. They're up and down. We're going in and we're interacting with them more. So I can't conclude and say that was the cause of it, but sometimes less is best, and let them lay down and do their do what they need to do and kind of step back and don't interfere. The same concept as throwing the drying agent on the piglets. Did we just disrupt the litter and potentially do more harm than what our intentions were to do good? So we didn't measure that. We were just, and that was kind of a, I wonder if this is what's happening. So we just looked at the percentage of litters that were disrupted by our behavior, but I didn't necessarily look to see if the mortality was due to crushed pigs or laid on. I did not.
Yeah, I'm really surprised by the high incidence of gastroenteritis in the piglets, even at just 7 days. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what we might be missing. I know we focus a lot on biosecurity and cleanliness. Dr. Maxwell years ago at Arkansas threw some dirt in the pen and had some better outcomes. I'm just wondering, what could be causing this high incidence of gastroenteritis and what might be missing?
Well, I think you nailed it a bit. The biggest issue is biosecurity and cleanliness, right? But I think one of the main findings was the colonization of some of the pathogens in the first 24 hours. So it could be just related to stomach function at that point. Are they able to produce enough stomach acid to deteriorate and lyse the pathogens at that point? Is it an issue with colostrum intake or feed and milk intake at that point? I don't have the answers. I think it's probably multifactorial, but I think you hit on probably one of the biggest ones.
Okay, Ashley, one follow-up. I know this is a pre-wean one, but I'm going to pull it back to a sow mortality one. Have you gone back and looked at to see if you've seen any negative impacts? Did you see any higher sow mortality post-implementation of the oxytocin?
So yeah, we've been following, like I said, we have the exact same questions, concerns, and we have been following those girls that received the higher dose, and we have not seen any statistical differences in sow mortality, but the big question we had is, we're looking at one time period. I want to know multiple, so P1 to P2, P3. So that's the trial we're doing right now, just to be sure we're not seeing any detrimental effects of that.
This question's for Abigail. Excuse me. On your +1 and +2s, did you have a lot of increase in competition amongst those animals where there was infighting, any damage to the pigs or the underlines? Were they clipped teeth or not clipped?
Yep, so we did not clip teeth in the pigs for this trial. Of course, you would expect to have a bit more competition at the underline when you're adding more pigs, but when you kind of sit back and watch the behavior of the litter, it's actually pretty interesting that they almost take turns a little bit when they have more pigs than teats, in that you'll see some pigs that are sitting out some of those suckling events, and it's not going to be the small guys that you would expect. A lot of times it's the average weight pigs, and so I don't really know how to explain that. I don't have any data to really prove that to you, but just watching some of those litters. So we did have a bit more competition, but not anywhere near a welfare concern for those piglets or for those sows. We didn't have teat damage or underline damage on those +1 and +2 sows.
I don't know if this is a comment or a question, but we'll start and we'll see where it goes. But we often think about lactation as it's just a continuous thing that happens. And it's really not. It's a series of events that happen called a suckling event, right? So who controls how much milk comes out of the sow? Is it the pig or is it the sow? And I would pose that it's actually both. The piglets will stimulate the sow to lay down and nurse, but then the actual nursing event is a physiological timing that has a definite length, right? It ends when the milk's let down and then the pigs go away. And Tom Sauber back at Iowa State in like 1996 or 7, I'll forget the date, he actually did a trial, and we were all grad students there. We all participated in it, where we put 2 full litters of pigs on a sow, and we swapped those litters every 40 minutes for 18 hours a day. And what do you think happened? She produced about twice the amount of milk that she would have if she'd only had one litter. And it just, you know, I always go back to that because it makes me think about it. It's a series of events, and it's probably why when you put 2 extra pigs on, you saw what you just commented on. Some of them sit back and then they're hungry, right? So they start the next cycle. What happens if you change the timing of suckling events? Has anybody ever done? Tom's the only one I think that ever really did that on purpose, and he did it on purpose because he had 2 litters of pigs and he swapped them every 40 minutes. So as soon as you put that other litter of pigs in there, the sow laid down. They actually were nursing so many times you had trouble getting them to eat because they didn't have time to eat. It's pretty amazing what happens if you give the pigs the opportunity to stimulate.
Go for it, Daniel.
You guys have comment on that, or ready for?
They're going past that one, so.
It's a follow-up. If I understand from Dr. Annie Delara, Matthew, they're reporting that they're doing split suckling not only one and done, like you guys are describing, but they're doing that several times during the day, throughout the day, for several days, right? So focusing not only on colostrum, but also on, of course, milk consumption. Have you guys looked at that in your series of trials?
We have not. We've just looked at in the critical time period around the colostrum letdown and when is the optimal time. We have not done anything past that 24-hour period on looking at that. So no, we haven't.
Yeah, it's good questions. Sorry, is there one more? Go for it.
Just one more for Ashley. Not sure if you guys looked into it, but any comments around farrowing induction?
Farrowing induction? That was actually a question we were just talking about earlier, listening to this conversation of, hey, what have we looked at recently on farrowing induction across different genetics? And we've done it several years ago, but wanting to get a better understanding, so that may be an area we look further into in the future as well. That I was going to make a comment for discussion is when we talk about what areas of research do we need to be focusing on, maybe induction is one of those areas from a livability stillborn standpoint.
Yeah, excellent question, Karini, and thanks for setting us up right there, because that's what we want to transition into now. And so appreciate everybody here. You can take your seats, or you can stay there if you want as well, too. Really what we want to do in the next 10 or 15 minutes is get some input from everybody. What are some things that are working well on your farms? What are some things that maybe you need help on? Back to the questioning the dogma mentality. I think that's what we want to approach the next couple of minutes with, and we'll just open it up for some direction from the industry. What are the questions that you have that you'd like help getting answers for that we can tackle in the subsequent years of this program? Everybody has the answers. We knew John would raise his hand, so John, what do you got?
Yeah, I'm just fascinated by all the new evidence on the gastric enteritis, the gastric ulcers in sows. You know, we know there's an influence of the maternal on the progeny, and just wondering if we should be spending some time focusing on this gastronomic or gastroenteritis issues in our animals. And then, you know, I think the split suckling showed that we can hurt our best producing pigs. So maybe we do need to find some other ways to help reduce pre-weaning mortality by looking at some other things.
Thanks, and thanks for Daniel to help all the introverts out there. We do have a QR code set up right here. If you don't want to raise your hand and you have some input for us, feel free to scan that and leave it for us. But next.
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the speakers. Just fantastic job. I guess my challenge to the people that are making the grant decisions, the prioritization of the task, is I think we just saw the model. I think we need to go into the GDU barn breeding gestation barns, the post-weaning area, and create that same chart of all the things that we think we need to do, and go back and challenge which one of them really matter today, and prioritize our efforts there on the execution, because I think we already know most of the things that could make a difference. We hear about body condition and guilt development and lactation intake and all those kinds of things, doing postmortem and diagnostics. Let's go figure out which ones we should really execute and which ones to get rid of that paradigm on. So that'd be my recommendation.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, right? And I don't think anybody here is flush with labor on their farms, so we need to make sure that they're doing the things that are making the most impact. And questioning what we're doing right now is the key, and something that Ashley's been talking about for a number of years as you've been given this presentation, focusing this information. So, good point. Other comments, questions, input? Everybody's hungry? So, all right, if that's the case, then, oh, there are some up here. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, actually, Abigail, can you answer that first question? Did you look into that?
Yes, so we did see a greater percentage of fall behinds that we pulled off of those +2 sows. We saw that like a quadratic response. And so that's also a missing piece, I guess, of that trial, is that we don't have a full understanding of what happened to those pigs after we pulled them off. But in looking at those fall behind litters, just in general on that farm, extremely high survivability of the fall behind litters, and weaning really good size 13.5-pound litters. So yeah, we did see more fall behinds in those +2 and +1 sows.
Again, I appreciate everybody's input that we've had here today. Still a few minutes left. If anybody has any other comments, I'll give it to Paul.
So one of the questions has been is what we've observed is we push lactation more as we get more wean pigs. We see better subsequent total born. And so again, that sow lactating at full capacity appears to be reproductively better. And so it'd be interesting to have some work that would help us understand how's that occurring, how can we exploit that further, and is that a multiple parity effect? We've seen it where we can go into sows that never weaned that kind of number, you know, particularly in closures, and they can wean the pigs. You just got to put them there. And so there's some of those things that'd be interesting to see if we really, I think Chantel's work says challenge them more as a P1. Should we be looking more at challenging each subsequent litter to help us in, because one of the main fallout reasons is reproductive performance. And so can we help ourselves there just challenging farrowing?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And a lot of what Chantel did was to challenge them so that they actually had functional teats in the subsequent litters right there, but we kind of stopped the story sometimes at that point.
But if you are going to do that, then don't forget also to follow condition, weights, etc., over the different parities, because I doubt that just challenging the animal will do a positive job. If they lose too much condition, I think it is going to work counterproductive.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and I was thinking about that too, that Mikayla also just finished up a trial where she was looking at feed intake differences of sows, and what really amazed us through, 4,000 sows worth of data, I think it was about 68% of them actually gained weight during lactation. And what the sow that we're feeding today is not like what we used to, and so back to the metabolic and the hormonal changes that are going on there that allow us to nurse a full litter and then have advantages in subsequent performance is really amazing. So, Carolina?
Hi, this gastritis situation has been very revealing to me. I think, I don't know if in this bucket or in the sow bucket or where, but definitely would be interesting to look into treatments on the sour, dietary and approaches to do either competitive exclusion or what would help reduce maybe, if it is already when the pig is born. I know there wasn't gastritis there, but is there something that we can do one step before the pig is born to try to minimize that gastritis or ulcer incidence in the pigs?
Thanks, Carolina.
call it yeast or, anything else.
Along that gastritis concern, and again, in the study here we saw today, we're looking at coccidiosis as a potential, rotas have been, an ongoing headache forever, and rota C particularly a big headache. Some of the new vaccines, the MedGene product has done a really nice job so far with controlling that. It'd be interesting to look at some pigs where we see very good rota control versus quote unquote not so good, and see if that gastritis is part of that rotavirus issue.
John, you got the last one.
Just a comment, because I saw an anonymous comment there about sow care day one. So we talked today about day one pig care, and outside, I wasn't here yesterday, but outside of this meeting, there's been talk of transition feeding and maybe some more need of research on just the sow part around parturition, because that's obviously contributing to sow mortality, but maybe piglet mortality issues as well.
Yeah, really, really good point. We got to keep the vision broad when we're tackling some of this right here. And so, again, really appreciate everybody joining us yesterday and today. We've had a great turnout. We've had a lot of people really interested, more than we actually had seats for everybody. And so make sure and tell everybody that didn't make it here to get in the registration line earlier next time, and they'll have a seat. But 2 points that you need to understand. We'll start back in at 1:15 in the main ballroom. So that's when the afternoon session starts. And more importantly, lunchtime is probably starting right now at noon. It is a plated meal, and so just go find a seat at one of the tables in the main ballroom. They'll bring you your food, and you can start chowing down then. So thanks again, everybody.